Okay, so you want to own a ski resort. You picture it instantly. A base lodge with a stone fireplace, powder days, a lift line full of people who are genuinely happy to be spending money, hot chocolate at $8 a cup, and a mountain that once it's built basically runs itself every winter. Gravity does the work. Snow falls for free. People show up in droves every time a storm hits. And you just stand there collecting lift ticket revenue while everyone else does the skiing. Here's what that picture leaves out. Before you sell a single lift ticket, you will have spent somewhere between $150 million and $500 million. You will have spent a decade fighting for permits on land you might not even own. And on the one day a year that decides whether your season is profitable or catastrophic, you will have absolutely no control over the outcome. Because that day is decided by the weather, not by you. Let's start with the land. Because this is where the fantasy falls apart before you've bought a single chairlift. The overwhelming majority of ski terrain in the United States, somewhere around 60% of it, doesn't sit on private land at all. It sits on national forest land, leased through a special use permit issued by the U.S. Forest Service. That sounds like a shortcut. It isn't. Getting a new special use permit approved for a ski area that doesn't already exist involves an environmental impact statement, public comment periods, wildlife studies, water rights negotiations, and a review process that routinely takes 5 to 10 years before you're cleared to cut a single run. And once you have the permit, you don't own the mountain. You pay the Forest Service an annual fee calculated on a sliding scale tied to your gross revenue, typically landing between 1.5% and 5.5% of everything you make that season, every single year, for as long as you operate. If you want private land instead, in a prime market like Colorado's I-70 corridor or Utah's Wasatch Front, mountain acreage with the elevation, vertical drop, and north-facing exposure needed to hold snow runs anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 an acre. And you need thousands of acres to build something that competes. Now let's talk about what it costs to turn a mountain into a functioning resort. Because the terrain is free, everything you put on top of it is not. A modern detachable high-sped quad chairlift, the kind that doesn't force your guests to slow down and get bruised by a moving chair, costs between $8 and $12 million fully installed. A gondola, the kind that defines a destination resort's silhouette, runs $15 to $25 million. A mid-sized resort competing at a serious level needs somewhere between 6 and 10 lifts. Do that math and lift infrastructure alone is a $60 to $150 million line item before you've built a single building. Then there's snowmaking, and this is the piece almost nobody outside the industry understands the scale of. Natural snowfall is unreliable enough that virtually every commercially viable resort in North America runs an artificial snowmaking system covering its beginner and mid-mountain terrain at minimum. A full snowmaking system for around 100 skiable acres. The pipe network buried under the mountain, the pump houses, the compressors, the individual snow guns running $20,000 to $50,000 apiece, and a reservoir large enough to hold the water you'll need, costs between $15 and $30 million to build. Add a base lodge complex with rental shops, a cafeteria capable of feeding thousands of people at lunch, ski school meeting areas, and restrooms, and you're spending another $10 to $30 million. Add a grooming fleet, because every run gets machine groomed overnight, and a single snowcat costs $250,000 to $500,000. A resort needs 5 to 15 of them, running every single night of the season. Add it all up: land, lifts, snowmaking, base facilities, grooming equipment, and design and engineering fees on top, and a genuinely competitive mid-sized resort costs $150 to $300 million to build from scratch. A true destination resort, the kind with multiple peaks and a village at the base, can clear $500 million before you open. You also need to survive avalanche control. And this isn't optional paperwork, it's a daily operational program. Any terrain steep enough to be fun to ski is steep enough to slide. Resorts run certified avalanche forecasters who assess snowpack stability every single morning before dawn. And where the risk is high, ski patrol physically triggers controlled slides using explosives, hand-thrown charges, remote detonated gas exploders mounted on towers, or in some cases, actual military-grade artillery under agreement with the National Guard. This happens before a single guest is allowed on the mountain. Every storm cycle, all winter. It requires a permanent, highly trained, federally regulated patrol staff. And it is one of the only industries in America where a private company routinely uses explosives as a standard operating procedure. Get it wrong, and the liability isn't measured in thousands of dollars. It's measured in fatalities and the kind of lawsuits that end companies, which brings us to insurance. Because skiing carries inherent risk, and every state with a ski industry has passed laws limiting resort liability for the ordinary dangers of the sport itself. A fall, a collision with another skier hitting a tree. But that legal protection doesn't cover lift malfunctions, avalanche control failures, or negligent grooming, and it doesn't stop lawsuits from being filed. Commercial liability insurance for a mid-sized resort runs between $500,000 and $2 million annually. And that number climbs sharply after any serious incident, the same way it does in every higher-risk guest-facing business. Add equipment insurance covering a lift fleet worth tens of millions of dollars, and property insurance covering buildings sitting in a location prone to wildfire in the summer and avalanche in the winter. And total insurance costs for a serious operation regularly exceed $3 million a year. Now let's talk about labor. Because this is where the seasonal nature of the business becomes brutal in a way.
Oh.
That's different from almost anything else in hospitality. A mid-sized resort employs somewhere between 800 and 2,000 people at the peak of a winter season. And almost none of them work a full year. You need lift operators standing outside in single-digit temperatures for 8-hour shifts. You need certified ski patrol, trained in wilderness first aid and avalanche mitigation, who are simultaneously first responders and explosives technicians. You need snowmakers who work overnight, often in conditions 20 degrees below freezing, physically dragging hoses and guns across the mountain in the dark. You need ski and snowboard instructors, most of them certified through the Professional Ski Instructors of America. And you need enough of them to staff a ski school that can absorb a holiday week surge without collapsing. Finding that many seasonal workers willing to relocate to a mountain town for 4 months is difficult enough. That a huge share of the American ski industry now depends on the J-1 International Exchange Visa, programmed to fill entry-level lift and lodging positions every winter. Payroll for a resort typically runs 35 to 45% of total revenue, and unlike a year-round business, you're compressing almost all of it into a 100 to 130 day operating window. Then there's energy. And this is the cost that catches new operators off guard the hardest. Snowmaking is one of the most electricity-intensive processes in commercial real estate. Pumping millions of gallons of water uphill, compressing air to atomize it, and running that system continuously across dozens of guns for days at a time draws enormous sustained industrial power. It is not unusual for a ski resort to be the single largest electricity consumer in its entire county. Add lift motors running all day, base lodge heating and cooling, kitchen equipment, and snowcat diesel consumption, and energy costs typically run 8 to 12% of total operating revenue. If you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find videos like this one. Now let's talk about how the money actually comes in, because just like every other business we've broken down on this channel, the sticker price at the gate is not where the profit lives. Walk-up single-day lift tickets at major American resorts now run between $150 and $220, and the industry has shifted almost entirely to dynamic pricing. The same airline-style model where a Tuesday in February costs half of what a Saturday over President's Day weekend costs. But here's the twist that makes skiing different from every other business we've covered. The dominant revenue product in the modern ski industry isn't the daily lift ticket at all. It's the multi-resort season pass, sold months in advance at a steep discount. The Epic Pass and the Icon Pass being the two that now define the entire industry. A pass that grants access to dozens of resorts across the country can sell for around $1,000, which sounds like the resort is giving away access. In practice, it's the opposite. Season pass sales happen in the spring and summer, months before a single snowflake falls, which means the resort is collecting massive amounts of cash flow during its dead season, locking in attendance before winter even begins, and shifting almost all of the weather risk onto itself instead of the guest. A pass holder who drives up on a mediocre 20-degree day with light coverage has already paid. A walk-up guest who sees a bad forecast simply doesn't buy a ticket at all. That's the entire strategic logic behind why Vail Resorts built its business around the Epic Pass, starting in the early 2010s, and why it triggered a wave of consolidation across the industry as competitors scrambled to build their own multi-mountain pass coalitions just to survive. Once guests are on the mountain, the margin structure looks exactly like every other captive audience business we've talked about. A cafeteria lunch at a base lodge, guests who can't leave the property without losing hours of ski time, generates gross margins in the 70 to 80% range. Equipment rentals, skis, boots, and poles that cost the resort a few $100s to buy and get rented out 100+ times over their useful life, run 60 to 70% margins. Ski school lessons, particularly group lessons where one instructor is generating revenue from 6 or 8 guests simultaneously, are among the highest margin products in the entire operation. And then there's the piece that actually makes destination resorts profitable at scale: real estate. On-mountain lodging, condominiums, and ski-in-ski-out real estate development routinely generate more long-term value for a resort ownership group than the mountain operations themselves. Guests who stay in resort-owned lodging spend on food rentals and lessons every single day of their trip instead of just the day they buy a lift ticket. And the real estate itself appreciates. Independently of how good any single season's snowfall was, the case study that illustrates exactly how this can go wrong is the Yellowstone Club in Montana, a private ski resort. Built for ultra-wealthy members starting in the late 1990s, it was an extraordinary asset. Thousands of acres of private terrain, a membership base that included billionaires, and initiation fees that ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in 2008, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Not because the mountain wasn't valuable, and not because members stopped wanting to ski there, but because the ownership group had financed an aggressive real estate expansion with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt right before the 2008 financial crisis hit. And when credit markets froze and luxury real estate sales stopped overnight, the debt service didn't stop with it. A resort can have a genuinely excellent mountain, a loyal customer base, and still collapse financially because the capital structure behind it couldn't survive one bad cycle. The mountain was never the problem. The balance sheet was, that leads directly into the risk that no operator can plan their way around, whether a rainy weekend costs an amusement park a bad day. A snowless winter costs a ski resort its entire season. Natural snowfall is becoming less reliable almost everywhere in the ski industry's traditional footprint. And even resorts with world-class snowmaking systems need a sustained stretch of nights below roughly 28 degrees to make snow efficiently, because snowmaking above that temperature threshold becomes dramatically less effective and far more expensive per acre covered. A warm December, increasingly common across the Northeast and parts of the Rockies, can delay opening day by weeks, and every day a resort isn't open is a day of fixed costs. Staff, debt service, insurance, with zero matching revenue. Rain on snow events, warm storms that fall as rain instead of snow and then refreeze into ice, can wipe out a base layer that took weeks of snowmaking to build, forcing the resort to essentially start over. And it isn't only a bad luck story for small operators. Even industry giants get hit. Warm, low snow winters have forced early closures and driven meaningful revenue misses across the publicly traded resort operators in recent years, which is exactly why the shift toward multi-mountain season passes exists in the first place. Spreading a guest's spending across a portfolio of mountains in different mountain ranges, so that if one region has a bad winter, the pass revenue was already collected regardless. Let's put two seasons side by side, because this is where the business either works or it doesn't. Scenario 1. You operate a mid-sized resort that cost $200 million to build, financed at 65% debt. It's a good winter. Consistent cold snaps in November let your snowmaking crews build a full base early, and natural snowfall stays close to average through March. You average 6,000 skier visits a day across a 120-day season, roughly 720,000 visits for the year, blended per guest spend across lift access, food, rentals, and lessons runs around $140. That's just over $100 million in gross revenue. After payroll at 40%, energy at 10%, insurance, maintenance, marketing, and debt service on your original construction loan, you clear somewhere between $12 and $18 million in net operating income. A genuinely strong return on a $200 million asset. Scenario 2, the same resort, the same market, but December stays 15 degrees too warm to make snow efficiently. Opening day slips 3 weeks. A January thaw wipes out half your base right before the only major holiday period of the season. And your skier visits for the year come in at 420,000, 40% below plan. Your payroll and insurance costs barely move because you still needed the staff on standby and the coverage in place regardless of how many guests showed up. Your debt service is identical whether it's snowed or not. That season, instead of an $18 million profit, we're looking at a loss in the range of $3 to $6 million. Same mountain, same lifts, same staff. The only variable that changed was the sky, the American ski industry. According to figures the National Ski Areas Association tracks every year, operates somewhere around 470 resorts nationwide, down from more than 700 in the early 1980s, a slow, steady consolidation driven by exactly the economics we just walked through: capital intensity, climate volatility, and a business model where the operators with the deepest balance sheets and the widest geographic footprint are the only ones who can absorb a genuinely bad year without going under. Total industry revenue runs into the billions annually, and skier visits across the country regularly top 60 million a season. That's not a struggling industry, but it is an industry that has quietly consolidated around the operators who understood something the small independent mountains often didn't: that a ski resort isn't really a snow business. It's a capital markets business that happens to require snow to open its doors. If you want to go deeper into how businesses like this actually get modeled and stress-tested, there's a detailed business guide linked in the description and pinned in the first comment. It walks through the frameworks behind everything in this video. Worth checking out? Behind every powder day, behind every lift line full of people who drove hours to be there, is one of the most capital-intensive, weather-exposed, and financially unforgiving businesses in the entire hospitality industry. The mountain doesn't care about your debt payment. The snow doesn't know your season pass sales projections. It falls, or it doesn't, and everything you built underneath it either survives that uncertainty, or it doesn't. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing.